Seriously, what would you have done? No, really. I want you to put yourself in my shoes for just one goddamn minute before you judge me. Everyone's a hero in their own head, a knight in shining armor, but you're not there. You don't feel the air, you don't know the history. You just get the headline. It was a Tuesday. A completely unremarkable, soul-crushingly boring Tuesday afternoon. We were at the Food Land, the one over on Orchard Street, and we were having the fight. Not a new fight, mind you, it was the fight. The one we'd been having on a loop for the better part of a year, just with different set dressing. This week's theme was breakfast cereal. I'd reached for a box of Captain Crunch. I know it's poison, it's pure sugar, but my week had been hell, and I just wanted the simple, stupid comfort of something that tasted like childhood. Marley, of course, saw it happen. It was like she had a sixth sense for me, attempting a moment of personal joy. She was holding two boxes of something that looked like shredded wheat mixed with birdseed. Trent, we talked about this, she said, her voice dangerously calm. The empty calories, the glycemic index. And I checked out. That's the only way I can describe it. A switch flipped in my brain. The sound of her voice, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the squeak of a nearby cart's wheel, it all just faded into this dull, gray static. I wasn't angry anymore, I wasn't even frustrated, I was just tired, a kind of tired that feels like it's in your bones, in your marrow. The kind of tired that makes you wonder if you just laid down on the linoleum floor, you'd fall asleep right there between the Pop-Tarts and the granola. I was staring at her, but I was seeing right through her. I was a million miles away. That's where my head was at when he walked up. That's the honest-to-God truth. So when people ask me why I just stood there, that's why. I wasn't even there to begin with. He materialized next to our cart like he'd been beamed there. One second it was just me and Marley locked in our silent, miserable little war. The next, there was a third person in our bubble. He was wearing a cop's uniform, and for a split second my brain just accepted it. Blue shirt, a badge, a heavy-looking belt with all the usual hardware. It looked right, but it was also off, the way a dream is off. You know how in a dream you can be in your childhood home, but the kitchen is also your high school gym and you just accept it. It was like that. The fabric of his uniform had a synthetic sheen, the kind that reflects fluorescent light too brightly. The badge pinned to his chest, I see it now in perfect, horrifying clarity, was just a little too big, a little too gold, like a prop from a high school play. And his shoes, they were scuffed brown loafers, not the polished black boots a real cop would wear. I saw all of this, I registered it, but the information just sort of floated away, unable to find a hook in my brain to stick to. Ma'am, he said, and his voice was flat with a weird, rehearsed quality. He wasn't looking at me, only at Marley. We need you to come with us. We have a report matching your license plate to a felony incident. Felony, the word hung in the air between us, thick and greasy. It was so out of place, so melodramatic for a supermarket aisle. I opened my mouth, a protest finally forming on my lips. What felony? Show me some ID, but then I saw Marley's face and the words died in my throat. She didn't scream. She didn't argue, she didn't even look surprised. That's the part that's been eating me alive, the part I keep replaying until the edges are worn smooth. She just deflated. Her shoulders slumped, she turned her head and looked at me, and her expression was nothing. It was a blank slate, not fear, not confusion, not a plea for help. It was the same look she had last week when I asked who kept calling her phone and hanging up. A look that wasn't guilt but wasn't innocence either. It was a closing down, a wall being built. And in that moment, my tired, checked-out brain concocted a whole narrative to protect itself. This is it, I thought. This is what all the whispering on the phone was about. She's in some kind of trouble and she's been hiding it. That look wasn't a plea for help. In my mind, it was a confession. I'll get the groceries, I mumbled, my voice sounding like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. He put a hand on her upper arm, a grip that looked too tight, his knuckles white. I saw her flinch, a sharp intake of breath that was drowned out by the store's awful smooth jazz soundtrack. He didn't drag her, but he propelled her forward with an undeniable urgency. They moved past the smiling face on the Cheerios box, past the candy at the checkout, towards the big automatic doors. The doors slid open with a pneumatic swoosh that sounded like a final, damning sigh. She didn't look back. And I was left standing there, clutching a box of Captain Crunch in one hand and a box of organic fiber twigs in the other, like some kind of idiot. The fight was over, the silence was deafening. And the only coherent thought my brain could produce, the only anchor it could find in the swirling chaos was, we're almost out of milk. It wasn't just insane, it was a survival instinct. My mind was trying to build a raft out of the most mundane driftwood it could find, while the truth, that I had just watched my wife get taken, was a tidal wave about to crash over me. I just stood there, I just watched her go. The paralysis held me for a minute, or maybe it was 10. Time had turned into this thick, syrupy substance. I was just staring at the doors, half expecting Marley to walk back in, laughing, telling me it was some kind of elaborate prank. But the doors just kept opening and closing for other shoppers, other normal people living their normal Tuesday. My little island of insanity was undisturbed. Then a voice, sharp and crackly, cut through the fog. "You're not going to do anything." I turned. It was a little old lady, the kind you see everywhere. White permed hair, a floral print blouse, and eyes that were like tiny, judgmental raisins. She was pushing one of those carts with a wobbly wheel, and it was making a rhythmic squeak 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 that was drilling into my skull. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hoarse. "That man, the policeman," she said, gesturing with a wrinkled hand towards the doors. "He didn't look right, and your wife, she looked terrified." Terrified? My brain latched onto the word. I hadn't seen terror. I'd seen resignation, emptiness. Had I completely misread it? Was I so wrapped up in my own bullshit that I couldn't even see my wife's fear? The old lady's certainty was like a slap in the face. "He's a cop," I said, but the words sounded flimsy and hollow even to me. "It's about her car." "His badge was crooked," she snapped back, her voice surprisingly firm. "And since when do city cops drive a beat-up Ford sedan with a dent in the side? I saw them get in it. You call 911, you call them right now." She wasn't asking. It was an order, and thank God for her because my own brain was still useless. It was like she was the designated driver for my conscience. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. The 911 operator was calm, professional. Her voice was an anchor in the storm that was starting to brew in my chest. I gave her the location, described the man, described Marley. I heard her typing. The silence on her end of the line stretched on. "Sir," she said finally, her tone shifting, a new urgency in it. "We have no officers dispatched to that location. There are no incidents reported involving your wife or her vehicle. Are you in a safe place, sir?" That's when the floor dropped out from under me. The gray static in my head didn't just clear, it evaporated, replaced by a screaming, high-pitched alarm. The fluorescent lights seemed to brighten to an unbearable intensity. The distant beeping of a checkout scanner sounded like a flatlining heart monitor. My own heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild animal trying to escape. A cold sweat broke out all over my body, and the store suddenly felt like it was tilting, the shelves leaning in on me. I dropped the cereal boxes. They hit the floor with a hollow thud. I stumbled towards the doors, shoving past people, not even apologizing. I burst out into the parking lot, the afternoon sun blinding me. I scanned the rows of cars, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps, but they were gone. The beat-up Ford, the man, Marley, all of it, gone. And the only thing left was this vast, gaping hole where the last 10 minutes of my life should have been, filled with the horrifying, screaming truth. I had let a stranger take my wife. I hadn't just watched, I had let him. Okay, wow, this blew up. My inbox is a dumpster fire of people calling me everything from a coward to an accomplice. I get it, from where you're sitting it looks bad, it is bad, but you don't know the whole story. You're getting the highlight reel from hell, not the day-to-day grind. A lot of you are asking why I didn't immediately tackle the guy, why I didn't scream. You think it's so simple, but you haven't lived in my house for the last 6 months. You haven't seen the slow-motion car crash my marriage has become. Let me give you some context you're missing. About 2 months ago, Marley started getting these calls. Always on her cell, never on the landline. If I was in the room, she'd let it go to voicemail. If I asked who it was, she'd just wave her hand and say, "Nobody." Wrong number, but then I'd hear her later in the other room, her voice a low, urgent whisper. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone. It was the sound of secrets. Then there was the money. Small amounts at first, 50 here, 100 there, withdrawn as cash back from the grocery store. When I asked about it, she said it was for her lunches, for coffees with friends. But it didn't add up. Last month I saw our credit card statement, a charge for a single night at a hotel, a cheap one out by the airport, a place neither of us would ever stay. I confronted her. She told me a friend of hers from college was having marital problems and needed a place to crash for a night, and Marley had used her card to help her out. It sounded plausible, I wanted to believe it, but it felt thin, like a story you tell a child, the final straw last week. I was trying to find a document on our shared laptop and I saw she was still logged into her email. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I did, and there it was. A whole separate folder I'd never seen before, just labeled M. Inside were emails with a man I didn't know. His name was Philip. The messages weren't explicitly sexual, but they were intimate. He talked about her brave decision. She talked about being ready for the next step. One of his emails ended with, "Don't worry about Trent. He won't do anything, he never does." He never does, so when that guy in the fake cop uniform showed up and Marley looked at me with those dead eyes, my brain didn't scream danger. It screamed Philip. It screamed next step. I thought, this is it. This is her leaving. This is the brave decision. I thought she had arranged this whole insane theatrical thing to get away from me, and the look she gave me wasn't fear, it was pity. It was her telling me without words that this was how it had to be. I didn't freeze because I was a coward. I froze because I thought I was witnessing the bizarre, humiliating end of my marriage, and a part of me, a dark, ugly part, felt that maybe I deserved it. The real cops showed up, and the world snapped back into sharp, brutal focus. The lead detective, a guy named Sandoval, had the kind of weary, patient face that told me he'd seen every possible flavor of human stupidity. He took me to a cramped, windowless office at the back of the supermarket, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. He didn't treat me like a grieving husband. He treated me like a piece of a puzzle he was trying to solve, and he wasn't sure if I was a corner piece or just some random bit from a different box entirely. "So, Mr. Peterson," he began, his pen tapping a soft, rhythmic beat on his notepad, "you and your wife were arguing before the suspect approached." "It was nothing, it was stupid." "About cereal," I said, the words sounding insane as they left my mouth. "Right, cereal." He didn't look up. "And you say you didn't find it strange that an officer of the law would be intervening in a domestic dispute over breakfast food." I thought it was about her car." "That's what he said." "But you didn't ask to see his credentials. You didn't ask for his name, his badge number." Each question was a little jab designed to test my defenses. "It happened so fast, I was confused." "You were confused," he repeated, his voice flat. He finally looked up at me and his eyes were like little black stones. "Your wife was taken from a public place in broad daylight, and your primary emotional state is confusion." I felt a surge of anger, hot, defensive, and completely useless. "What are you trying to say? You think I had something to do with this?" "I'm not trying to say anything, Mr. Peterson. I'm trying to understand why a man watches his wife get escorted out of a grocery store by a stranger, and his first instinct is to do nothing." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "We looked at your bank records. You're a financial advisor, is that correct?" "Oh, yes." "You'd know your way around money, then. We see you've made some significant cash withdrawals yourself over the last few weeks. Far more than your wife's little cashback amounts. And you recently applied for a home equity line of credit, a big one. Were you and your wife planning a renovation?" My blood ran cold. The cereal, the emails, Philip, all of it was a smokescreen I'd thrown up, even to myself. The real secret, the one that kept me awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, was mine. The market had turned. I'd made a bad call, a catastrophically bad call, trying to cover a client's loss with my own money, then trying to cover that loss with more money. I was in a hole so deep I couldn't even see the sky anymore. "It was for an investment opportunity," I stammered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Sandoval just nodded slowly, his pen tapping, tapping, tapping. "An investment, right. And this man Philip from your wife's emails, have you ever met him?" I was reeling. They'd already pulled our data, they were moving so much faster than I was. "No, I don't know who he is." "We do," Sandoval said, his voice dropping a little. "His name is Philip Rourke. He's a marriage counselor. We pulled the hotel records. Your wife paid for the room, but the guest's name was her friend, just like she told you. A friend who confirmed her story. It seems your wife was trying to get you to go to counseling with her, Mr. Peterson. That was her brave decision. Getting help for your marriage." The air left my lungs. The whole narrative I had so carefully constructed, the affair, the secret life, her betrayal, it all just dissolved into nothing. She wasn't leaving me, she was trying to save us. And the man I had cast as her lover was the one she hoped would fix the mess I had made. The mess that was so much bigger than I had let on. The next 48 hours were a blur of sleeplessness and lukewarm coffee. I sat in my silent, empty house, the silence a screaming accusation. Every object was a monument to my failure. The half-empty coffee cup Marley had left on the counter. The book face down on her nightstand. I called her phone 100 times, each time going straight to the dead, flat finality of her voicemail. On the third day, Sandoval called me. "We need you to come down to the station, Trent. There's been a development." The hope that flared in my chest was so painful it almost brought me to my knees. A development. That meant something, that meant anything other than this suffocating silence. When I got there, they didn't put me in an interview room. They took me to a small viewing room with a large monitor on the wall. Sandoval was there along with another, older detective. Nobody offered me a seat. "We got a hit on the suspect's vehicle," Sandoval said, his voice all business. Traffic cam picked it up 2 hours after the abduction heading south, but that's not what we want to show you. He nodded to the other detective who tapped a keyboard. The monitor flickered to life. It was grainy, black and white security footage. The timestamp in the corner read 2:17 p.m. on Tuesday. The location stamp said Gus's Gas and Go. It was a gas station about 5 miles from the Foodland. The camera was aimed at the front of the store. A beat-up Ford sedan was parked by the pumps, and standing next to it were two men. One was the fake cop, the other was me. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees went weak. It was me, wearing the same shirt, the same jeans. I was talking to him, not just talking, I was gesturing, my hands moving emphatically. At one point, I reached into my pocket and handed him something. It looked like a piece of paper. "We found the clerk who was working that day," Sandoval said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He remembers you, says you paid for your gas in cash. Says you were having a very intense conversation with the other gentleman. Something about being late. It was impossible, it was a lie, I wasn't there. I was at my office, stewing in misery after a terrible client call before I left to meet Marley at the store. I opened my mouth to say it, to scream it, but then the camera zoomed in. It zoomed in on my face as I turned slightly towards the camera, and it wasn't my face, it was close, terrifyingly close. The same hairline, the same build, the same general features. But the eyes were different, colder, and the line of the jaw was harder. It was like looking at a distorted reflection in a funhouse mirror. "We ran facial recognition," Sandoval said. "Took a while. Your brother Dean, he has a record, assault, fraud, looks like he's been in and out of trouble for years. We showed his mugshot to the clerk. He confirmed it. That was the man at the gas station. Dean. My younger brother, the black sheep, the one we never talked about. The one who'd called me 3 weeks ago from a burner phone, begging for money, whispering about some very bad people he owed. The one I'd sent $5,000 to, telling him to disappear, telling him to never contact me again. And I remembered the piece of paper. It was a photograph. Before I sent the money, he'd sent me a picture to prove how serious his situation was. It was a photo of Marley, taken from a distance, walking into her office building. A threat. I had paid him to go away, but he hadn't just gone away, he'd come here. And he'd used my face as his disguise. The entire foundation of my reality crumbled to dust in that tiny, dark room. It wasn't Marley's secret, it was mine. It had always been mine, I just didn't know it. They found her. He'd left her in a motel room 3 states away, tied up but alive. The money I sent him was on the nightstand. He'd taken it and just vanished. The police say he'll surface eventually, they always do. I went to the hospital. A uniformed officer stood outside her door. He just nodded at me, his face impassive. I pushed the door open and went in. The room smelled of antiseptic and fear. She was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. She had a bruise on her cheek, a dark purple bloom against her pale skin. She looked smaller somehow, fragile. She turned her head when I walked in. I had prepared 100 speeches in my head, apologies, explanations, promises. All of it felt like dust and ashes in my mouth. It was all meaningless. She didn't cry, she didn't scream or rage or throw something at me, she just looked at me. And it was the same look, the exact same look from the supermarket aisle. The blank, empty, vacant stare, but I could read it now. It wasn't resignation, it wasn't a confession, it wasn't pity, it was recognition. In that moment in that aisle, when that man who looked so much like me put his hand on her arm, she hadn't been thinking about some secret she was hiding. She had been looking at me, her husband, the man who was supposed to protect her, and she was trying to understand how this could be happening. She was looking at me, and in my frozen silence, in my pathetic, tired inaction, she saw an answer. She saw my complicity. She might not have known the how or the why, not specifically, but she knew. In her gut, she knew this darkness had come from my world, from my secrets. And now, in this quiet hospital room, she looked at me and I finally understood. There would be no trial for me in a court of law. Sandoval said my unwitting connection to Dean was a tragedy, not a crime. But the real sentence was being handed down right here. It was in her eyes. It was a life sentence of knowing that I had stood there, wrapped in my own selfish misery, and I had let the wolves take her. I hadn't just failed to be her hero, I had become the monster's shadow, and she knew it, she knew everything.